Hi there. Today is January 17th, 2020, and yesterday I read that J.R.R. Tolkien's son, Christopher Tolkien, had passed away at the age of 95. That was some touching news because I've been a hardcore fan of Tolkien for nearly my entire life. The Lord of the Rings has been a phenomenon for 3/4 of a century, but if Christopher Tolkien hadn't spent the later half of his life editing and publishing his father's writings, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to experience the Quenta Silmarillion, the mythology and the legends that gave so much depth to these tales and made them so much more than sword and sorcery adventure stories. Tolkien was a major influence on my life and my hobbies, and the sigil I use for this YouTube channel is based on the Elvish alphabet he invented, which he called the Tengwar. By coincidence, this weekend in January is also the weekend of the Eomira convention, one of the biggest science fiction conventions here in New England, and that makes this a good time to do some cooking in honor of J.R.R. Tolkien and his son Christopher. And if there's one food from the Lord of the Rings that we see again and again here on YouTube, it would be
Lembas.
Lembas bread, Elven bread.
Lembas bread.
Lembas bread.
Lembas bread.
Lembas bread.
Lembas bread.
Lembas bread, precious.
More Lembas bread.
Yes, Lembas Waybread. And so, here's my tribute to Tolkien, namely yet another YouTube video about making Elvish Lembas. Oh, and one more thing. If you want to hear a soft-spoken and very lovely audiobook reading of the Silmarillion, be sure to check out a YouTube channel by the name of Serenity Star. If you're a fan of Tolkien's Legendarium, you won't regret it. And now, on to making Lembas Waybread. We start by preheating the oven to 350 degrees, and now we pulverize the seed of the malorn tree. Actually, these are pine nuts, which were very common in medieval recipes, and which we're using as a substitute for the mythical malorn trees that were very special to the elves of Middle-earth. Preparing this recipe isn't difficult, as it just requires mixing together flour, baking powder, and salt. We whisk the dry ingredients together, and this is important because it incorporates air into the dough and helps it rise. Now we mix in 1/2 cup of butter and 1/3 cup of brown sugar. Since this is based on the creations of the elves, we get to use some more unusual ingredients, including cardamom and mace. From here, we add milk and honey, and the honey really helps to thicken the mixture into a solid dough. To give this bread a flavor from the undying lands of the West, we zest a lemon and an orange. I think the citrus flavor would be authentic because after eating lembas for a long time, Sam Gamgee wanted to eat simple bread and meats rather than elvish bread. After adding the malorn seeds to the mix, we knead it together into a thick dough. Then it's simply a matter of rolling the dough about 1/2 inch thick. How to fix it. Lembas may be fictional and only seen in Tolkien's writings, but it was more personal than you might think. Tolkien himself served in World War I, and he saw action during the Battle of the Somme, one of the most terrible battles in history, and he began writing the Silmarillion in the hospital, recovering from trench fever. As a soldier, Tolkien frequently lived on military rations, and he brought this experience into his stories as a type of hardtack bread called cram. And so, in The Lord of the Rings and his other writings, the elves created their own waybread that was much more appealing to taste, as well as being very nourishing and hearty. Because of this, fans of Tolkien's works have gone out of their way to recreate this mystical food, which is why we see so many of these Lembas videos here on YouTube. And our dough is ready for baking, so we lay it in squares on a baking sheet. I have a cast iron fetish, which is why I'm using a cast iron pan to bake this Waybread. We laid the baking sheet with parchment paper to keep it from sticking, though it's still browned nicely on the underside. We're cutting a crisscross pattern in each square to make it look more like the movie because there wasn't anything in the books that specified this. And that's all done, so into the oven it goes to bake for 20 to 25 minutes at 350 degrees. The finished Waybread looks rather plain, but again, this is accurate. When Gimli the dwarf first saw Lembas, he thought it was ordinary cram, but he was very surprised at how delicious it was. Nonetheless, there's no reason we can't add some extra decoration by giving this a sugar glaze. This is a very simple glaze consisting of nothing more than lemon juice and powdered sugar. Whisk it all together, and you have a lemon glaze for topping any pastry or any confection from Lothlorien. The Lembas of the Elves could sustain one of the tall men of Minas Tirith for many days, but what we have here is a treat to serve your dinner guests, whether your party is unexpected or long expected. Either way, serving Lembas will certainly be a way to tide over a crowd of hungry hobbits and men alike. I realize the original Lembas didn't have a sugar glaze, but the next time I make this for a fellowship of travelers embarking on a long quest, I'll skip the glaze. Nonetheless, this has a very good citrusy flavor to it, and that may very well be realistic. After all, Gimli compared it to the honey cakes of the Beornings, and that certainly suggests this had a more sweet flavor than cram. You might even say the inclusion of citrus in this may help to prevent scurvy, which was also something travelers in the ancient days had to contend with. But most of all, I hope you've enjoyed this, as it was made in recognition and respect for Christopher Tolkien, who spent the latter half of his life publishing his father's works, and by doing so, he made us all richer for experiencing the lost tales of Middle-earth that never would have been revealed if not for him. So to all of you, may your journeys be guided by the light of the Star of Eärendil, and may you find your way safe and sound back home. Because in the end, that was truly what The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were about. Thank you for watching, and Namarie.